I surprised my daughter with a house for Thanksgiving. She didn't thank me. She asked how much she could sell it for. So I told her the truth. Nothing. It's still in my name. My name is Franklin Burke. I was 68 that autumn, with a bad knee, a good back, and hands that still knew what a straight line felt like. I had buried my wife 2 winters earlier. I had learned to talk to empty rooms and to listen to their answers. I worked slower, but I still worked. I kept my tools sharp and my promises sharper. I had 2 grandchildren, Ben and Maya, and a daughter who drifted like a tide and crashed like one too. The cottage I found sat near their school, with a fence that latched clean and a yard big enough for races. I walked it in the evening and heard my wife in the quiet. "Get the light right," she would have said. "Keep the drafts out." I set a key box by Aaron's plate as the turkey steamed. I pictured squeals and paper crowns and the kids racing in socks across a safe floor. I pictured gratitude like a small fire. Instead, I felt a draft. It came from a place I knew too well. It blew the napkins and barely moved the candles. It made me tighten my jaw and steady my breath. It made me plan. Erin leaned back and asked what she could get if she unloaded the place before Christmas. She had that polished voice she used when she was 2 steps ahead of herself. The room went quiet in a strange way. Forks made small clicks. The football game in the other room sounded far away and childish. Ben made a nervous sound that wanted to be a laugh. Maya watched me. I kept my eyes on the key box and thought about promises. I had not promised her a check. I had promised the children a place where Sunday night would not feel like a cliff. I had promised quiet hallways, a table big enough for homework, and a fence that closed with a click you trusted. I told myself to keep things calm. Calm was not weakness. Calm was a plan. I pressed my thumb to the corner of the table and waited for my heart to catch up with my age. It did, just barely. I let the silence do the work. After I answered, the air grew heavier. I felt the key in my pocket like a warm coin I had carried too long. I let my shoulders drop a notch. Erin lifted her glass and used words like smart and future, the way people do when they want the shine without the substance. Her mouth smiled. Her eyes counted. The children looked from face to face, the way small birds look at fences, testing for gaps. I met Maya's eyes and gave a small nod. I wanted her to see what a fence was for. I wanted her to feel the difference between a door that welcomed and a door that sold. I told myself to show, not argue. I did not rush to fill the space. I let the room decide where it stood. I watched the clock tick, the steam lift off the turkey, the way Erin's fingers tapped the table. It felt like the slow crank of an old winch. It felt like something below us was moving. I told myself to plant my feet before it moved too far. Steam fogged the kitchen window while I cleared plates. Erin slid in behind me and said I had promised her independence. She said it like a verdict. I could feel the dent her words wanted to leave. I steadied myself on the counter and thought of her at 8, hiding under a blanket tent with a flashlight, asking for one more story. I thought of my wife, bent over a project, humming. The truth was simple enough to hold in one hand. I had promised the children a stable place. I had not promised anyone a windfall. I said so, steady and plain. The oven beeped at the same time. I watched my breath fog the glass. I let the truth sit between us like a heavy bowl. It was not pretty, but it would hold. She did not like the shape of it. Her jaw set. The kitchen felt too small for 2 people who would not back up. I rinsed a plate I had already rinsed and wondered when love had turned into a tally sheet in her mind. I did not say that out loud. Some thoughts needed to stay inside my ribs and keep me warm. She stepped into the hall and her thumbs started moving. I saw her reflection in the oven door. Fast, neat, like knitting but colder. The oven timer trilled and nobody moved. I thought about words that pool in phones and turn into storms. I had seen it before. I had watched people throw their days into that deep well and call it action. I wiped the counter twice and told myself to be the part of the room that did not shake. She slid the phone into her pocket and came back with a new shine in her eyes. She had a plan now. She said we should tour the place that night. I took a slow breath and agreed. I kept the lockbox code to myself. I put the key box in my jacket and felt its small weight. I told myself to be ready for small tests that led to larger ones. I told myself to watch her hands more than her face. We put on our coats. I turned off the oven. I left the lights on in the dining room like you do when you want a house to remember you belong there. We stepped into the cold. The wind bit my ears and sharpened my thoughts. Dusk held the cottage like a cupped hand. The fence latch clicked the way I liked, clean and final. I pointed out the new shingles at the ridge and the way the gutters ran true along the eaves. I walked them through rooms with fresh paint that did not smell like paint anymore. I showed them the small bedroom where a child could sleep without hearing the world's panic. I let my palm rest on the broad kitchen counter I had sanded smooth. Aaron moved like an agent. Phone up, angling for light, counting outlets, not moments. The children moved like children, racing time, naming corners. I listened to the house and the house sounded pleased. I thought about my wife's habit of standing still in a doorway to see if a room could carry joy. It could. I nodded to nobody. I watched Aaron glance at the street as if money might be waiting in a car. I felt a pinch behind my eyes that had nothing to do with age. I told myself not to argue with a tide. You do not yell at water. You get higher ground. I would hold the higher ground. In the living room, Aaron asked for all the keys in a voice that tried to sound casual. It was a little too smooth. I knew that voice. I had used it when I wanted a tool I did not need. I took the ring from my pocket and slid 2 keys free. I handed them to her and kept one. The metal warmed my palm as if it had a pulse. My rule was simple and old enough to trust. Boundaries were not punishments. They were fences that kept the wolves out and the children in. I looked at Ben and Maya and pictured them slipping in from rain with their backpacks and their wet shoes and their good news. I saw them here long after anyone online got bored. Erin pocketed the keys and did not thank me. Her eyes went to the door and then to the street again. Somewhere out there she believed a quick hand could turn this place into numbers. I believed something else. I believed in slow light and strong hinges and small rituals. I believed I could still hold a line. I locked the door behind us. The latch clicked. It sounded like a promise. It sounded like the start of a fight I could not avoid and would not lose. In the morning I saw the cottage glowing on her page. She had found the best angle and the softest light. She had written about fresh starts. Then she had invited strangers to inquire. It felt like she had dragged our kitchen table into a street market and set a price on my chair. Messages piled under the picture with little hearts beside them. I felt heat rise to my face, then fall back into my chest like a coal dropped into sand. I counted to 5. I reminded myself that a storm on a screen was still just weather. I went outside and walked the block until my knee complained. I passed old maples and listened to their dry talk. I thought about what a house needed to become a home. Not listings, not praise. Time, attention, rules that held when hands got greedy. I returned to the quiet of my own living room and stood where the light fell. I told myself I would not be dragged into that market. I told myself not to argue with a mob that could vanish in a blink. I reached for my coffee and let it steady me. I started a list in my head. Not of posts to write, of things to protect. I called her. She said I was overreacting and that this was how people did things now. She told me to be modern and to stop making problems where solutions could be easy. I listened and watched my hand. It looked old and steady. I told her I was not people. I was her father. I said it softly because shouting at a wave did nothing but wet your face. She went quiet for a beat, then spoke faster. She asked if I wanted her to struggle forever. She asked if this was revenge for years when I had to bail her out. I let those words land and felt each one look for a bruise. I did not offer one. I told her the cottage was for the children and their school nights and their quiet mornings. I said it the same way I would say a measurement. Flat. True. She ended the call with a sharp goodbye that cut nothing. I stared at my hand again and wondered when it had stopped being a bridge and started being a gate. I wondered if a gate could be both. I decided it could be if the hinges were strong. She brought a friend in a blazer that afternoon. The friend walked like a tape measure and breathed like a calculator. They stepped into the living room as if they were tasting fruit at a stall. I stood in the doorway and explained that the house was not for sale. I did not raise my voice. The friend pointed at corners and tried to talk numbers to the air. Ben hovered near the nook and peeked around a shelf. He did not want to be seen. He did not want to be in a sale. When the friend left, he stood taller by an inch that only a grandfather would notice. Erin's mouth flattened. Her eyes were busy. I could see her running scenarios the way a boy runs alleys in a game. She glanced toward the street where cars might line up and then back to the room where a life might grow. I recognized that look. It was a door closing on one choice and opening onto another. She wanted speed. I wanted roots. I leaned my shoulder against the frame and let the wood hold me. I told myself not to flinch. I told myself to be the still part in a moving day. Stillness had weight. She felt it. At home I wrote a rule with a thick pen and taped it to the cottage fridge. The letters were blocky and honest. The house was for school nights, reading, and calm. It was not open for tours. It was not a stage. I smoothed the tape and felt the cold bite through the paper to my fingers. My hand shook a little. The truth did that. It came through the bone and rattled as it took its place. I thought about lines and how small ones held bigger things. The line on a map that keeps a river from being someone's road. The line of a beam that keeps a roof from sagging. The line in a mouth that stops a bad idea from spilling. Small lines decide big storms. I stepped back and looked at the paper again. The fridge hummed. The room felt like a shop in early morning before the crew arrives. I listened for doubt. I heard work instead. That was better. I put my palm flat to the metal and closed my eyes. Hold, I thought. Hold fast. She tore it down that evening. The tape screamed off the steel like a warning. She ripped the paper in two and let the pieces fall as if the floor were a bin for old plans. She said I did not control her. She made the word control sound like a cage. I did not flinch. I picked up the pieces and smoothed them against my thigh. I wrote the rule again, slower, as if I were carving it. I taped it back to the same spot. The second copy looked stronger. Maybe that was my hand. Maybe it was the moment. I told her I was protecting what I built and what I wanted for the children. I kept it simple. She called it stubborn. I called it care. We faced each other across the hum of the fridge like boxers deciding whether the bell had rung. The children waited in the living room listening. They could hear the shape of the fight even if they could not hear the words. I wondered what that shape would leave inside them. I wondered how to sand it down later. I decided the only way to make a clean edge was to keep it straight now. She left the kitchen with her jaw set and her shoulders high. I touched the paper. It held. She tried sugar next. The soft voice, the soft hands brushing a sleeve, and the soft promise that she only wanted options. She said she was thinking long-term for the kids. She said she could use a little freedom to get started. The words came like music, meant to slow my pulse. It almost worked. I thought about every save I had confused for love. The credit cards paid, the cars fixed, the late-night rescues that turned into jokes. Those were not love. Those were bandages on a habit. I told her options for the children were not the same as options for cash. I kept my feet planted. For a moment the room felt even, like a scale that had stopped twitching. Even was better than tilting. Even was not peace, but it was a place to breathe. I watched her eyes lose their shine and sharpen again. Even never lasted with us. She cleared her throat and reached for a new track. I folded a dish towel with care and set it in a straight line by the sink. Small straight lines. I used them like nails. She walked away without looking back. The towel stayed put. So did I. That night the family chat lit like a trash can in a wind. She used words the way people use stones when they have run out of bridges. She called me selfish. She called me old-fashioned, which I did not mind. Old tools still cut. Old ways still hold. I did not chase her around the thread. I posted a photo instead. The stair treads with 2 lines of glow I had placed for small feet in a dark morning. The light looked quiet. I let it speak for me. There was a pause in the chat that reminded me of snow. Everyone's words fell away for a breath. Then other small fires started in corners. Opinions, advice, warnings. I set my phone face down and listened to my house breathe. I wanted to run. I wanted to argue. I did neither. I remembered the sound of my wife's laugh and the way she would leave a room when it got loud, so the room would remember what quiet felt like. I walked to the sink and ran water into an empty glass. The sound was plain and good. Let the work speak. Let the words starve. She came back with an appraiser the next day as if my threshold were a suggestion. The man had a clipboard and shoes that did not squeak. He smiled the way people do when they plan to be efficient and gone. I stood in the doorway and told him there was no appointment and no need. He read the air, which is a skill worth having. He nodded and left with a step that said he preferred clear lanes. Aaron stared at me as if I were glass. I felt my heart knock against old bones and told it to remember other knocks. Winter footings, roof pitches in heat, late-night drives with a feverish child in the back. This knock was loud, but it was not new. It was work. I could do work. She stepped closer until I could see my tired eyes in hers. She looked like me when I was young and pressing against a wall that had not yet learned my name. I wanted to reach for her face. I did not. I stood my ground and let the moment pass. It did not break me. It did not fix her. It only moved on. That was enough for the day. I closed the door with a click I liked. She tried a different blade after that. She said I had never believed in her. She turned every rescue into an insult and every save into a proof of doubt. She said I had made her small. I listened to the wind of it and bent my head. I did not argue with each piece. That would have been a trap. I watched her hands. They shook. She was tired and scared and angry and hungry all at once. I heard the girl with the blanket tent somewhere behind the woman counting exits. I let that voice hold me back from saying what would only deepen the cut. Then I spoke a plain thing. I had believed in her so much that I kept showing up. The words tasted like copper. They steadied in my mouth and grew heavy in the space between us. She did not like their weight. She turned away. I stood by the window and watched the late sun flatten itself against the houses across the street. I thought about justice and how sometimes it wore a badge and sometimes it wore a porch light. I thought about my grandchildren's faces and the way fear could carve lines into them if I let it. I made a private vow. I will chase a simple justice. I will chase it for as long as I breathe, and I will do it for the sake of my family. Soon, I'm going to rewrite the future of my legacy. You won't believe what's about to happen. But before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. Ben was in the living room when she came at me again. She used the word controlling and aimed it like a dart, right past him and into my chest. He shrank. I remembered being his age and learning the shape of adult anger just by standing near it. I did not answer her, not right away. I sat down beside him instead and pointed out where the light was best for reading. I talked about the shelf we could build and the spot for a beanbag. My voice stayed even. She paced behind us, throwing old moments into the air like confetti that did not celebrate anything. I kept my eyes on the book in Ben's hands. He steadied just enough to hear me. When I finally stood, I let her words fall to the carpet where they belonged. I told myself that a boy will remember the first adult who refused to turn him into a witness. I would not do that to him. The room calmed by inches. She left with a hard look and a slammed door. The slam rang through the small rooms and hit the windows. I let it fade. I counted to 5. I told myself we were not done. Not close. Near midnight, I saw a headlamp slide over the curtains. A van eased into the driveway and went dark, like a cat crouching. I pulled on my old coat and stepped onto the porch. The motion light came on with a dull click and washed the yard in a flat, honest glow. 2 figures froze. One looked up with a toolbox in his hand and a question in his eyes. The other kept her face shaded. I did not need a speech. I lifted my palm and shook my head once. Workmen know that language. He looked at the door, then at me, and chose the easier job. He left. The van backed out slow, tires whispering on cold pavement. I stood there until the light went off and the yard went back to night. My breath fogged, my hand shook only a little. I felt old and ready at the same time. I thought of my wife in winter, tapping a window latch to check its bite. "There," she would say, and I heard it like a small bell. I locked up and walked room to room just to hear the latch's answer. Every click steadied me. Every click said, "Keep going." In the morning, I put up a small door camera and adjusted the motion light so it caught the first step clean. I wiped dust from the lens with a square of an old shirt and felt ridiculous and proud. I sent Erin a short note with plain lines. No more visitors without me there. No more walkthroughs. She replied fast and hard, the way she always did when a wall went up. I set the phone down. I did not answer the parts that tried to hook me. I brewed coffee and carried it into the front room. Sun landed in a bright patch on the floor. I stood in it until the cup cooled. I went to the fridge and touched the paper rule again. The ink had bled a little at the edges where my hand had pressed it. I liked that. I liked that something written in a rush could still hold a day steady. I told myself it would hold the next day too, and the next. The house needed a calm captain. I could be that, one small task at a time. The camera's tiny eye watched the door. I watched the rooms. We both did our part. Sunday dinner at my place was thin. The roast was fine. The talk was not. Erin came late and brought a new story with her. Someone had offered more than anyone would expect, she said, as if a number could turn our week into a success. The room leaned toward her voice. People like a strong tone. It makes them feel safer than the truth. I felt my pocket for the key and pressed it until the edges bit my skin. It helped. Ben and Maya ate quietly. They looked tired in the way children look tired when a day has had too many adult corners. I wanted to lift that weight off them with my hands. You cannot do that. You can only clear a path and hold it. Erin spoke like a racer bragging about the last turn. I listened. I kept breathing in a steady rhythm I had learned lifting lumber. Pull, hold, release. Nobody asked me a thing. Nobody needed to. My quiet had become its own answer. After dinner, I did the dishes alone and let the water run hot over my knuckles. It hurt in a clean way. The house clicked and settled. The week turned another notch. We were still moving. The next morning, I told her my plan for the week. I would be at the cottage with the kids after school. We would build a reading nook. We would make a place for their bodies to rest and their minds to open. She said I had not asked her. I said there are things a grandfather does and then explains. It was not a line I had prepared. It was just the truth that came when truth was needed. She made a face I knew from long ago. Disbelief with a fringe of hurt. It used to pull me off my mark. Not now. I packed a tote with small tools, screws sorted in old jam jars, a square, and a pencil. I told Maya to bring a pillow she loved, and Ben to pick a book that could stand being read out loud. We drove in a quiet that was not cold. We were in step in a way you only get when hands will soon be busy. The cottage smelled like fresh air and sawdust. It smelled like my old shop, like work that would mean something by the end of the day. I set the tote on the floor and felt younger by a year. We measured the back corner of the living room and taped a rectangle in blue. Ben pressed the tape firm with his thumb. Maya held the end like a professional. We argued in a friendly way about shelf height and settled it by holding a book upright and checking its crown. Cocoa steamed on the counter. The window showed a dull sky and the dark line of the fence. Inside we were warm and small and fine. The kids leaned into the work the way children do when it feels like building a fort. I kept my voice steady and my instructions simple. I showed them how to mark a cut and how to check twice even when the first mark looked perfect. We made a mistake, laughed, and fixed it. They took turns with the drill. I steadied wrists and watched eyes. This was the kind of day I had wanted. Not a picture, not a caption, just work and time and a little sweetness to carry it. I glanced at the door once and saw the porch light waiting to be useful. I liked that too. By late afternoon, the bones of the nook were up. It looked like a promise you could sit in. We left it there to rest. Erin arrived with 2 friends just as we were lining books in a row to test the shelf. She carried a measuring tape and a fast voice, talking about Saturday as if the house had agreed to be a stage. Her friends looked around with the curious eyes people bring to other people's lives. I planted myself between the doorway and the living room. I did not puff up. I did not shout. I held the space with my body the way you hold a ladder for someone who does not yet trust it. The kids went quiet. You could hear the motion light hum faintly. Erin made a case like a salesman pressing the last minutes of a sale. I kept my hands still and my answers short. We were not doing this. Not here. Not with the children in the next room. Her friends found reasons to look at their phones. They did not want to be inside a family's bruise. Eventually they left. Erin's mouth went thin. Mine did not. The house felt smaller and stronger at the same time. I watched her watch the shelves and the cocoa mugs and the pile of sawdust under the sawhorses. She was counting, but the wrong things. I could not fix that yet. I could hold the threshold. So I did. On the way out, she played a new card. Holidays. Birthdays. The dance of knives we had all done before. I felt it cut across the years and try to open old scars. I stood very still and let it miss. I told her that none of those days were bargaining chips, and that she was better than treating them that way. Maybe she heard it. Maybe she did not. I did not say more. After she left, I changed the lockbox code, wrote it down on a scrap for my pocket, and crossed the yard to Luis next door. He saw me coming and came down 2 steps, hands in his sweater. He did not ask for a story. I told him the basics and asked him to keep an eye when he could. He nodded the way men nod when there is nothing to argue about. I gave him a spare key and felt both foolish and wise. He pointed once at the motion light and said it was a good one. I agreed. We did not make a pact with big words. We made one with a key and a nod. I walked back to the porch in air that smelled like wood smoke. I thought about Saturday and cars idling at the curb. I told myself to be ready for all of it. Saturday did come. Cars nosed up and idled as if the street itself had sent invitations. I stood on the porch with a mug of cocoa and the steady face I used when a big delivery arrived at the wrong shop. People leaned out to ask if this was the right place. I used one answer, plain as a fence post. Owner present. Private residence. The words did what words can do when they are simple and true. Engines quieted, then moved on. It was not dramatic. It was enough. I felt my pulse even out. I remembered lifting trusses with a crew in July heat and how the last one always felt like you had made a place where shade could live. That is what I felt on that porch. Shade and the edge of relief. Erin came up the walk in a fast line. Her voice carried down the block. Neighbors slowed their rakes. She said I was ruining her life, and this time I let one sentence go free. I am saving your children's childhood. It came out steadier than I felt. It was the truth. She hated it. I did not move. The porch boards stayed calm under my boots. The cocoa cooled. The day did what days do. It moved forward. She did not stop at anger on the porch. She raised the stakes the way gamblers do when their hands get hot. She said she would take the kids out of town and start fresh elsewhere. The words landed like a hammer on my ribs. I stood very still and let the house help me. Walls can do that if you have built them right. I looked at Ben's face and saw the math he was trying to do. 2 homes. 2 towns. 2 of everything. I would not let him do that kind of math. I told the kids we would choose paint for their doors after school. I kept my voice flat. Work ahead, not panic. We drove to the hardware store and held up strips in the bad fluorescent light. Maya picked a blue that looked like lake water in rain. Ben picked a deep red and did not look at me while he did. I nodded and put the cans in the cart. My hand shook as I slid them into the trunk. They felt heavier than their size. On the way back, I watched the mirror more than the road. I felt watched and did not care. Let the whole town watch if it helped me keep a promise. I made a slow patrol of the rooms after light fell. Habit more than fear. The camera watched the porch. The motion light sat ready like a held breath. A window in the back room was unlatched. The gap was the width of a finger. I closed it and felt the latch bite. I stood in the dark and listened to the small ticks that make a house alive. Baseboards easing, a pipe settling. My wife used to tap each latch and hum at the click. I missed that sound. A car door shut somewhere out on the street. I went still and counted to 5. A footstep scuffed near the fence. The light did not catch it. I stood with my hands empty and old and ready, and not ashamed of any of that. Sturdy over stubborn, I thought. Sturdy could stand in the wind without leaning into it. I moved one room at a time and checked the doors again. I laid out the paint chips on the counter for morning. I set the roller tray beside the sink. The house quieted around me as if I were a stone in a stream. I let the water go by. I kept my shape. Somewhere a phone buzzed. I did not rush to it. Morning put warmth in the kitchen before the heat did. I mixed batter while the kids dug out the syrup and set plates. Pancakes do a job that speeches cannot. They take the edge off a day. We ate without hurry and then cleared space by the living room window. I strung a line and we clipped their drawings with old wooden clothespins. The room looked like a school hallway and a cabin all at once. I sanded a small plaque I had cut from scrap and handed it to Maya to hold in the nook. She looked at it like it might answer a question she had not yet asked. Ben stacked books and made his own quiet tower. I could feel the house gather those small sounds and store them. That is how a place becomes more than boards. Erin stood in the doorway and watched us. Her eyes were winter. She did not step in. She took in the plaque, the line of art, the coffee mugs, the blue and red paint cans on a newspaper. I kept my hands steady and my face open. I did not invite. I did not forbid. I let the room say what it needed to say. It said home. It said not for sale. Her words came low and tight. Buying love. Performing generosity. Demanding loyalty. I had heard versions of those lines in other rooms, in other years. The cottage made them sound smaller. I answered in the only way I trusted. I kept working. I rolled blue on one door and watched the color wake up under the brush. Ben took the roller for the second coat and found a steady rhythm. Maya dabbed at the edges with a careful hand. Erin did not cross the threshold. She ran her thumb over her phone the way people sharpen a knife. I felt the phone's pull like a draft under a door. I chose to ignore it. Neighbors passed the window and pretended not to glance. Luis stood on his porch across the fence with his sweater pulled tight, then went inside without waving. It felt like weather changing. Thick air. Birds gone quiet. Erin took a picture and left. Her footsteps were bright on the path, as if the stones wanted to remember them. I watched the paint dry until it went from wet to right. When the kids were done, I sent them to wash their hands and sat on the floor. I leaned my head against the wall and let the room hold it. By afternoon, a stranger followed her back to the cottage. He had the look of a person who believes every house is a chance. His eyes kept moving. His shoes made small, eager sounds. He started to ask questions before he had taken off his coat. I stood close enough to be a wall without being rude. I did not play host. I did not point at features. I did not explain. He tried to charm me with details about neighborhoods that were not this one. He saw the shelf we had built and talked about value without seeing use. The children stayed in the nook and read in mutters like small engines. I felt proud of the mutter. It meant the room could keep them when a crowd could not. The man lasted 5 minutes and then found an excuse to step back into air that rewarded his kind of talk. Erin's face was a flat plate. Mine was not. I walked him to the porch and watched him hurry away. The motion light stayed off in full day. It felt like it was holding its breath for later. I was too. I knew her next move would not be a visitor. It would be a blast. It landed in the family chat as sunset turned the windows into mirrors. She wrote a careful story about an aging father and a gift with strings and a mind stuck in old ways. People came in fast with sympathy and advice. Some of them meant well. Some of them liked the sound of their own warnings. I read it all slowly and then put the phone face down. I went to the fridge and felt for the paper rule. My finger found the edge where the ink had bled. I traced it. The hum steadied me. Erin arrived as I stood there. She crossed the kitchen and yanked the paper free, again leaving the glue scars. I put up a fresh copy with larger letters and pressed the tape hard. 3 faint rectangles stayed on the door like a ledger. "We need a table," I said. "No phones. Just us." She laughed once. I set a time anyway. I set the chairs in my dining room that night and counted plates, even though I knew the number. I laid out napkins my wife liked, the ones with stitched corners. I put water glasses out and did not bother with anything stronger. This was not a party. This was a beam fitting into a pocket, and it needed a clean hit. I sat alone a while and listened to the old tick of the wall clock and the newer tick of my phone as it buzzed with messages I would not read. I pictured the talk that would come and the storms inside it. I pictured the children's faces and the way their eyes asked questions even when their mouths said nothing. I rehearsed the lines I needed in my head. Short, plain. I would lay the rule on the table like a tool and let it be touched. I would ask the only question that mattered. What do they want this place to be? I turned off lights one by one and left the dining room lit so the house would remember the shape of the moment waiting inside it. I slept lightly and woke early and did not eat. The clock hands moved the way they always do, slow until they do not. We sat. No phones, no side talk. I set a folder in the middle of the table. "I signed new papers last night," I said. "From today the cottage sits in a school night trust. It's for Ben and Maya. Homework, reading, sleep. It can't be listed, shown, or sold until Maya turns 18. I turned the top page so the kids could see their names. No showings. No quick looks. No visitors without me. If someone tries, they're turned away." I laid down 2 short letters. "These end any drop-ins and tell your helpers to stop." I looked at Erin. "I'll watch over it. If I can't, Luis, will I set the key box in front of the kids. Take one each. Use it straight and it will serve you. After school you can let yourselves in and wait for me. Your mother can join you when you're there." Aaron started to speak, but the paper did the talking. The clock ticked once like a gavel. The room decided where it stood. Aaron stood without her coat and walked to the hall. The door closed behind her with less noise than you would expect. The sound still carried. The kids held their keys the way you hold something that is both heavy and light. I poured water and did not trust my voice for a minute. We sat in a quiet that did not feel empty. It felt like a field after rain. I walked them to the car when it was time. The air tasted like metal. Neighbors peered through curtains and then pretended to find something else to do. I looked at my porch light and pictured it turning on at dusk the way it always did. The routine comforted me. The future did not. It felt like work. That was fine. Work I understood. Evening fell in strips. The house creaked as if it were shrugging off a weight. I washed plates I had barely used and dried them with the stitched napkins and put them away. The phone buzzed with new storms. Silence followed. Then more storms. Aaron would cycle through all of it. Silence, guilt, flattery, and back again. I would not chase any of it. I went to the cottage and walked the rooms and tested the doors and flicked the switch on the motion light. It woke up the steps with pale certainty. I stood there and let my chest find a steady beat. I thought about justice, not the courthouse kind, but the kind a grandfather can build with keys, rules, and the insistence that children deserve a quiet table. I said the words in my head like a small oath. I would hold this line. I would keep this fence closed to wolves and open to little hands. I would chase this kind of justice with the time I had left. If I had to spend the last of my strength on it, I would. The porch light hummed. The night took a breath. I stayed until the hum and the breath sounded like a promise I could keep. She tried a softer pressure first. Pickup time shifted without warning. The kids arrived late and wired, then guilty for reasons too big for them. I did not chase her car down the block. I set cocoa on the counter and let the routine catch their nerves. We sat in the nook and read until their faces loosened. I sent a short note later, plain, with times I would keep and times she could choose. No reply. The porch light hummed as dusk slid in. I watched the beam on the steps and thought of all the feet it would catch, honest and small. I thought of feet marching away, bigger and louder. I pictured both and chose which to serve. The house decided too. It held its heat. The camera blinked once like an eye that did not sleep. I checked the doors and listened to the baseboards tick. Night pulled the street quiet. The quiet felt earned. She brought 2 mothers and called it a play date. It looked like a showing until the laughter began in the corner. I had laid out puzzles and a stack of decent books, and the room did its work. The other mothers saw the blue door, the red door, the stair glow strips, the steady table. Small things add up when they are aimed at children. They asked for a tour. I did not give one. I showed them the reading nook and the fenced yard and said how early the school bell rang. They heard what mattered. It did not sound like money. Erin kept to the edge, phone in hand, waiting for someone to admire what she wanted to sell. It did not happen. When the last mother left, she looked at me as if I had stolen a victory that was hers. I felt nothing to steal. I swept sawdust from yesterday's cuts and left it in a neat pile. The first flurries came down like warnings and then decided to stay. We built small snowmen in the yard with crooked smiles and worse hats. The fence caught the wind and bent just enough, the way a good fence should. The house filled with that wet wool smell you only get on the right kind of day. Erin stood just inside the threshold and watched us shape a circle large enough for 3. She held her phone but did not lift it. Maya asked for a story before sleep in the new blue room, and I offered Erin the book. She took it and sat stiff at first, then found a rhythm older than arguments. The words softened the edges of the hour. When the story ended, she handed the book back and left without meeting my eyes. The wind rattled the motion light, and it hummed in reply. I turned the page for myself and read in the doorway, just to hear the room breathe. The next morning, a small sign leaned under a bush by the sidewalk. Not ours, not official. A cheap thing with an arrow painted too bright. I did not take a picture. I did not text. I picked it up and carried it to the bin behind the shed and broke it across my knee. The crack was clean and loud. I liked it more than I should have. I went inside and wrote a line on an index card in my blocky hand and slid it under the magnet on the fridge. It was not a rule. It was a reminder. The house was for rest, for reading, for growing. Words that simple can feel fragile until you set them where food lives. Then they harden. I made oatmeal and watched the kids eat too fast. Erin came by later and opened the fridge for water. Her eyes landed on the card. She closed the door without comment. That said enough. Ben's teacher sent a note home in the backpack. The handwriting leaned right and friendly. She wrote that he seemed steadier this week. She wrote that he stayed after class to ask about a project and then described it with too many details, which is what proud people do. I sat at the kitchen table and ran my finger under the words like a boy sounding out syllables. The house had done its job. The fence had helped. The rule tape held. I thought of all the things I had wanted to fix with cash over the years and how little those bundles had done to slow a spinning wheel. This week the wheel spun slower. I could hear it. I took Ben to the hardware store to pick a better reading lamp and let him choose the bulb. He chose warm. He chose right. We installed it together and stood back until the circle of light on the rug looked like a place you could trust. We left it on. She tried one last hard shove in words. New routines, new pickups, new nights away. The sentences had edges. I did not lean into them. I answered with the same times I had posted on the fridge and invited her to join us for homework at the table. She came late and sat across from Maya and did the longest thing a mother can do. Stayed. She did not fix everything. She did not break anything. Ben worked a map problem out loud. Maya read her paragraph twice. Erin's shoulders dropped a fraction. Routine can be a bridge when nothing else will hold. I watched it form between them plank by plank. I tightened it where it needed tightening with small jokes and small snacks. When it was time to go, nobody looked for a fight. The motion light came on for them on the steps, and for me after I had shut off the kitchen. We used the same light, and that felt like progress shaped like stairs. The block held a potluck with paper plates and casseroles that steam even in cold air. I carried over cookies on a tray and found space near Luis. He nodded once, then pointed with his chin toward the cottage as if to say, "It stands." Neighbors spoke in that half-whisper used for praise you do not want to embarrass. They said the kids looked happy. They said the small house suited them. Erin heard it. She stood a little apart and listened. Praise can cut when you want applause for the wrong act. She said almost nothing, which was new. I introduced her twice. Simple, and she shook hands without putting on a show. Later she helped fold a table and did not look at her phone for 5 straight minutes. That was a record this month. I walked home with the empty tray and the sense of a tide that had changed direction by 1 degree. 1 is more than 0. I finished Maya's plaque and rubbed a little oil into the letters until they caught the light. We held a small ceremony that did not deserve the word but earned it anyway. She hung it over the nook and stepped back with her hands pressed to her chest, as if she could feel the wood through air. Ben looped his key onto a plain lanyard and tucked it under his shirt like a medal he did not want to flash. Erin watched from the door and did not cross in. She was learning where the line sat, learning how a place can ask something of you without saying a word. I kept the moment small, no speeches, no bows. We went back to the table and ate apples with the noise apples make when teeth meet them right. The plaque hung and did what plaques do, reminded the room what it was for. It did not shimmer. It steadied. She brought a stranger again, but this one was not the fast-eyed sort. He had a paper in his hand with numbers scrawled in ink. He started to talk before he had even glanced at the children. I walked him back to the porch and pointed down the steps with 2 fingers. He looked past me at the red and blue doors and then out at the street where the maples dropped quiet leaves. He folded the paper and left. Erin did not argue. She stared at the porch boards as if they had insulted her personally. Silence can be a stronger boundary than a speech if you let it stretch. I let it. She finally asked if she could bring dinner next week and help with math at the table. I said yes and nothing else. Agreements do not need decorations. She left without slamming a thing. The camera blinked once and the light went still. We sat again at my dining table. Just us, no neighbors, no performance. The clock did its old work on the wall, dividing minutes into pieces you could hold. I set out the schedule in plain lines, and Erin traced down each day with her fingertip, as if she were learning a new map. The children handled their keys while we talked, nervous, pleased. The rule on the fridge had a small grease stain in one corner now. That made me like it more. Erin said she was still angry. I said I knew. She asked if the rule would change. I told her routines could shift, but the heart of it would hold. She nodded and looked toward the window where the porch light waited to be useful. It clicked on while we sat there. Nobody moved. We let it hum. Sometimes a hum is the loudest truth a room can manage. We listened until it steadied us. By Friday, the filing posted with the county and the street got quiet. No more idling cars. No more quick looks. The messages dried up because there was nowhere to take them. Erin brought pasta and stayed through math. That was enough. I washed 2 plates, straightened the towel, and turned both new locks. The porch light came on with its small oath and held steady. She could not sell what she did not own anymore. The children owned the quiet. Sale season was over. Childhood was not. When does love stop being rescue and start being a boundary you hold even when it hurts? Do you believe I did everything the correct way? Please tell me your thoughts in the comments below.
My grandpa's words really happened. I believe him. If you want more true tales stories like this, hit subscribe.